So when you ask yourself, what would Jesus do? Always remember that flipping over tables is among the possibilities. This is my favorite Bible verse, the absolute favorite. And for that reason, as a larger-than-life figure, there are many different versions of Jesus. And everyone has their own ideas and their own sense for who he was, what he did, and what he represents. And like me, most people were probably raised with a Jesus like this. Yeah, dignified, placid, well-groomed, somehow blonde and fair-skinned, despite being born among brown people. The Jesus we're taught to emulate is a perfect, peaceful pacifist, committed to nonviolence and obedient to authority. But the Jesus in this passage is anything but. Here we see the passion, the outrage, the anger behind the man, committing an act of aggression against those who have done wrong in his eyes. The story in the text is brief, but I can imagine how it went down. Having come to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, Jesus and his friends go to the temple to pray and make an offering. But when they roll up to the place, he discovers a heinous scam.
"Excuse me, sir," says a man by the entrance. "Actually, you'll have to buy an official sacrifice to receive a blessing."
Jesus pauses in mid-stride, and on his way past, and his brow furrows in disbelief. Seriously?
"Oh, yes, it's the new policy. If you'll head over to that table there, and you can buy some temple bucks, which you can then come back and select one of these fine options."
Now Jesus' face twists into an indignant sneer. Seriously?
"Oh, yes, indeed. And remember, the bigger the offering, the better the blessing."
Whew. At this, Jesus loses his cool. A low growl rises in his throat until the room is stunned to silence by a primal howl. The vendors' wares get thrown. Jesus storms at the money changers. He shoves the table. It tips. Money goes everywhere. People scramble to grab it. It's total pandemonium. Not yet finished, Jesus releases the sacrificial animals. He picks up a bullwhip and starts driving the profiteers out, yelling, "This temple is a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves." Now this is my kind of Jesus. He's many things: an insightful teacher, an inspiring leader, a healer, a peacemaker, a diplomat. But he's also willing to act decisively when need be. But how does this square with the rest of the story? We know him as the Prince of Peace. So why this act of apparent violence? Why would someone so opposed to fear be evoking fear in others himself? Because there's already violence in the system. It's often been said that power corrupts, and in this we see a perfect example. What made Jesus so angry was not just the scam itself. Such underhandedness happens all the time. It's that this racket was officially sanctioned. Law enforcement was looking the other way, and what's worse, the priesthood was in on it. We tend to trust and obey those in positions of power and authority, and this gives them power over us. Our trust gives them the power to decide what is true, what is right, what is wrong, and the way things are and the way they should be. This power can be used for good, of course, to guide and cultivate and protect, but it can also be abused. Now, left unchallenged, the official truth can be a total fiction, and obedience can actually serve injustice. In this story, temple officials abused the trust of the faithful to bilk them of their money. Such blessings at top dollar and claiming it to be what God really wants. As the gatekeepers to sacred truth, these officials thought they could speak with God's voice. And the people dared not question the scheme, not because of their fear, not because they're scared of the priesthood, but out of respect for the authority of the position. But Jesus was having none of it. He'd gone on a vision quest out into the wilderness alone, and he came back with a new perspective. The taken for granted reality, the truths of the world no longer held sway over him, and he could see what was really going on. He knew that's not how God works, and he recognized the scheme for what it was, an act of violence. Now, physical violence is obviously the most obvious kind, but violence happens in any unjust exercise of power. Emotional, intellectual, spiritual, economic, and other forms of violence are everywhere. And it's often these unseen forms that have the biggest impact on us. If you don't recognize it as violence, you can't defend against it. And so, as he'd done many times before, he spoke up. And even though he knew it would get him in trouble, he couldn't allow such injustice to go unopposed. He destroyed the scammers' trade, revealed the hypocrisy of the powerful, and gave the people back their power. He showed them no one could speak for God, nor stand as a gatekeeper against God, that those responsible weren't acting on God's behalf. They're just selfish little men with fancy hats. Now, this theme appears again and again throughout Jesus' story. Whenever powerful men appeared, speaking lies, using God's name in vain, manipulating religious or civil law to their own ends, Jesus rebuked them. Yes, you should respect authority when respect is due, such as the order to stay home, to self-isolate. That's good authority. But sometimes doing the right thing means you gotta call bullshit. Now, to qualify as PG-13, you only get 2 of those, and Siobhan already used one of them, so I'm going to have to figure out some other solution for the rest. But anyway, but speaking truth to power has its cost. Whistleblowers often become targets for those scared to lose their authority. And in Jesus' case, it endangered his life. He already posed a threat to Rome by undermining their rule by fear, but now he stopped a lucrative source of money for the religious elites. Within the week, though, they would plot to kill him, capture him, torture him, sacrifice him on a cross, hoping that his growing movement would end with him. It didn't, and here we are, more or less. Now, this is my favorite Jesus story for 2 main reasons. Firstly, because it shows the radical Jesus, the brave, uncompromising, anti-authority activist whose concern for justice was sometimes more important than tact or civility. And although he was committed to peace, he recognized that some things cannot be achieved just by them, nor are all situations worthy of such radical action. Now, the point here is not to be afraid to speak up, to call poppycock when you see it, and stop it before it can grow. Secondly, it teaches us to question everything, especially the things we trust the most. When even the most holy men of Jerusalem can become shameful hucksters, what else are the powerful people in our lives up to? What parts of the story of our lives are covering up the truth? What parts are actual, real fictions? What are those things hiding? And again, though, we shouldn't abandon all trust in authority or reality. Questioning is not the same thing as a blanket rejection. There are some authorities, some stories, some principles you can trust, at least in part. And living a life of constant doubt is exhausting. Total distrust can lead you into a mire of conspiracy theories, where fear and speculation replace reason, and nothing can be known for certain. It's a scary world indeed. But how can we tell the difference? Well, it's by its fruits. If the object of our trust produces kindness and compassion and justice, well, then the trust is warranted. If the product is fear and anger and hatred and greed, then our trust has been abused. Now, evidence for misplaced trust in authority is everywhere in today's world. The politicians we entrust to serve us and act in our best interests in mind all too often cater to the top elite 1% at our expense. We trust the police to serve and protect the public, but systemic racism, sexism, and classism in our legal system hampers the pursuit of justice to the point of counterproductivity sometimes. And as we see from our story today, organized religion can very much be prone to such abuse. If we believe religious authority unquestioningly, it's easy to mistake some human scheme for divine will. Now, the unholy alliance of Donald Trump's minions and the conservative white evangelical church in the United States is an ideal example of this. To belong to this community means revering the man and everything he stands for, no matter how contrary to Jesus' teachings they are, no matter how sick and twisted and cruel they may be. Thankfully, this is not true of all evangelicals, and certainly not true of all Christians. But the powerful keep working to strengthen that hold. Having faith does not require blind belief and unquestioning obedience. Faith is a willingness to engage, to struggle for truth. Don't just trust me because I'm standing here. Think for yourself. Now, many of those folks that come to Trinity regularly have been hurt by other churches, other religions. They've been judged for their beliefs, their background, even for who they are, their gender, their sexuality, their orientation. Some have even been explicitly driven from their communities or even abandoned by their families in the process. Others still have been explicitly abused, emotionally, intellectually, physically, sexually, by authority figures of all kinds. The horror of indigenous residential schools, so-called conversion therapy, molestation by priests, by predators in frocks, and more. All these acts of violence are ultimately protected and justified by a perverse claim to divine authority. And yet others have been swindled by charismatic conmen, prosperity gospel preachers promising unreasonable blessings at unreasonable prices, or told their fate is a product of their faith, implying bad fortune is some sick form of divine punishment. After such a violation, trust in the safety of the world can be difficult to regain, and any person in a position of power is seen as a potential threat. These tragedies cannot be undone, but we can work to prevent them, and we can offer support in the healing process. Now, we don't have the option always to speak up on our own accord, whether by fear or by shame or threat of reprisal, or out of pure incapacity. It's not always possible to help ourselves. For this, we need each other. On our own, it's hard to even tell what's hogwash. Without a second set of eyes, it'd be easy just to go along with the lie. But through collaboration, in partnership with one another, we can piece together the underlying truth, speak it, and work towards greater justice for all. Now, much like Jesus' journey into the wilderness, this situation with COVID-19 has been, it's gone a long way to changing our perspectives about the world. To slow the rate of infection, we've had to dramatically alter the way we live our lives. We wash our hands constantly. My skin's getting pretty dry here. We keep to ourselves, and we go without some of life's most favorite pleasures. Most of us are now working from home or attending school from home. Many of us have been laid off or lost our jobs entirely and are starting to get worried about how to stay afloat. Others still struggle on the margins with no job to lose and little support to speak of. But some are still getting up. They're getting up day after day and heading to work, but not work as usual. Those performing these essential services face a demanding task, maintaining the basic infrastructure of our society while also at constant risk of infection themselves. Meanwhile, financial markets flail about wildly. Since the outbreak began, the global economy has crumbled at an incredible rate. And each day, central banks print millions of virtual dollars to stem the collapse. Billions upon billions of dollars have been thrown into the market to nearly no effect. On one particular day a couple of weeks ago, the United States Federal Reserve, they printed enough money to fund a universal healthcare system in the United States, with enough left over to offer a free college education to any American who wanted one. Instead of doing that, though, they used it to prop up the market. For a moment, it was gone within hours. And it really goes to show you what's important and to whom. To the super elites at the very top of the food chain, money is everything. Their primary concern is to ensure continuous economic growth at effectively any cost. Every day we're not working and buying as much as we possibly can, their profits fall. They're still ultra wealthy. They still have zillions of dollars. But they do and always will want more. These are the folks who want to end the quarantine early, to protect the economy, who are willing to sacrifice the lives of our loved ones so an imaginary number goes up instead of down. They speak with authority about something we're not supposed to understand, to convince us to do what's right for the sake of their bottom line. Meanwhile, what's important to us is a completely different story. At a time like this, it's certainly not the CEOs, the investors, the ultra-wealthy elites keeping our society afloat. They're not essential workers, whom we can't do without. It's the people at the so-called bottom. It's the cashiers, the stockers, the food preparers, the deliverers, the healthcarers, the scientists, the technicians, all the other heroes slogging away whether they want to be or not. But even as vital as they are, many of these workers are not being paid a living wage. They receive no benefits and have no leverage to protect their own rights. Some employers and franchise owners are even denying paid sick leave to their employees, putting us all at risk with this reckless disregard for health and well-being. And yes, money does matter to us too, but it's as a means rather than an end in itself. A friend of mine has been deemed essential and sent back to work, but he makes only $14 an hour, the lowest legally permissible rate. And even at the best of times, he can barely make rent. He can barely buy food and eke out a measure of enjoyment in his life. And despite being highly educated, he's got like 2 university degrees and a college diploma. This is the only job that's available to him. It's the only thing he can find. And his situation is far from unique. There is good news, though. Fortunately, in times of crisis, it's often when we find positive change starting to happen. Governments around the world this week have begun taking emergency measures to help people. Last week, Canada expanded our employment insurance program to support those who have lost their jobs, who've lost their income, and are subsidizing wages for small and medium businesses to help ease the impact. Some essential workers are now receiving danger pay, so that's good, and many other injustices are being challenged by public pressure. These changes are promising, yes, but right now they're just temporary, and still not enough to help everyone who needs it. So if we're to follow any part of Jesus' story, it's the lesson in the parable of the goats and the sheep. Whatever you have done for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you have done for me. If the financial wizardry we've witnessed lately is any indication, it's not that there isn't enough money to go around. It's all imaginary anyway, so you can make as much as you want. It's that they've decided that we don't deserve it. The corporate profits and economic growth trump human need, environmental health, and serving the greater good. I call horse feathers. Horse feathers. Now's the time to overturn some tables, my friends. The world has changed forever. Normal is not coming back past this point, and it remains to be seen whether what's next will be way better or much, much worse. Like Jesus, we need to be brave. We need to speak truth to power, call out hypocrisy, and stand up to injustice wherever we see it. We need to make connections with one another and stand strong with our allies, struggling together for a common good. The decisions we make now will determine whether humanity comes together and moves out into the cosmos, or chases our money obsession till we all turn to dust. The old system has failed. It's time to move on to something new. And I am profoundly hopeful. All over the world, friends and neighbors are reaching out to help one another, to deliver supplies, providing words of encouragement, taking on burdens that can't be borne alone. Social media is alight with new communities and new possibilities. Friends and neighbors who've never met, musicians and artists sharing their talents, geeks and inventors plying their trade to help those on the front lines. Everywhere, outbreaks of loving support are appearing in the face of this challenge. We're starting to realize that we're not just a bunch of individuals just making our way in the world, isolated and alone. We're part of something greater than ourselves, and that our collective love is a force more powerful than any other. Now, the practice of social distancing is an example of this love. We're social beings, and we love to be near one another, but right now that's a danger to our most vulnerable. Practicing love today means sacrificing some of what we individually might want for the greater good of us all. It may sting right now, but by working together, we can weather this storm in safety. Think about what you can do. How can you help this great upswelling of love? How can you contribute to the world that's yet to be, but will come indeed? So I encourage you to follow Jesus' lead. Take a step back. Have a good, hard look at the world around you. If you don't like what you see, don't just accept it as just the way things are. Acknowledge that something is not right. Call baloney. And start overturning tables if necessary. Sure, you might not have the strength to act on your own, but you'll always find friends if you do what is right. Though the odds may be long and the stakes are sky high, I have an unshakable faith we'll pull through this together.